Welcome to Content with Character, the weekly podcast that'll give you the momentum you need to create content with more ease, clarity, and laughter. I'm your host, content copywriter Emily Aborn, and I'm all about unconventional marketing approaches. I believe in your big ideas, and I'm excited to help you share them in a way that's distinctly you. Welcome back to the Content with Character podcast. I don't know why I feel the need to say that every time. You know where you are. You just heard the intro. But I guess if you don't listen to the intro, it doesn't hurt to reiterate it every now and then, aka every episode. Okay, another thing I like to reiterate is who I am and what I'm doing here as the host of this podcast. Because who knows how well you're listening or if this is your first time listening. So today we're going to get that out of the gate right away. In case you are unaware, I'm Emily Aborn, a copywriter, podcast host, and content marketing consultant. Translation: I help small business owners write words for their website, figure out what to say on blogs, in emails, on social media, and beyond as they share far and wide about their businesses. If you ever want to learn more about me or disconnect in other ways outside this podcast, you can visit my website at emilyaborn.com or at any number of the links in the show notes. We will find each other. The reason for this podcast, Content with Character, is because there are so many topics that I want to explore with you and help you out with outside of what I actually do in pushing the pencil for people as a copywriter. So that's what I talk about on the show. We talk business, we talk marketing, we talk content creation, planning. Basically, my entrepreneurial journey is your entrepreneurial journey because I share the things that I'm experiencing and going through that I think would relate to you and yours and give you some help along the way. So in my mind, business and marketing, it's not just quick, simple, easy solutions. It actually a lot of times goes a whole lot deeper than just what you're sharing online. So, okay, that's why we're here. Backstory over. Thanks for going there with me. And onward we go into the topic du jour, which is listening. The way I got the idea for this topic is actually, I cannot remember how I got the idea for this topic. I think I just saw it or heard it somewhere and I was like, ooh, that's interesting. So I started looking at these different levels of listening and thinking, how can we apply this to our own business and our own marketing and our own content? It's not my unique thought or principle. This comes 100% from like other leadership techniques and books and training. In fact, I think the most notable and perhaps the original version of this came from Stephen Covey's The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Say that 7 times fast. I'm pretty sure I've made that exact same joke about that exact same book before. Okay. Anyway, the 5 levels of listening has been adapted and shared in a variety of different ways. But for the purposes of this episode, we're just going to keep it really simple and we're going to talk about the implications and benefits of the 5 levels and then like one little action step that we can take if we're stuck in one of these levels to improve our listening skills. I don't want to say stuck. If we tend to camp out at one of these levels as our sweet spot. So real quick, the levels that we're going to get into are ignoring, which is like not listening at all, mentally or physically tuning out. Level number 2, pretend listening. That's when you give kind of like those surface level acknowledgements, nodding or being like, yep. I love that, but you're not really like actually engaging in what the person is saying. Number 3 is selective listening. That's when you pick out parts of the conversation that align with your interest or agenda and you ignore the rest. Number 4 is attentive listening, focusing fully on the speaker, paying attention to the words and the meaning. But then we move into level 5, the nirvana of listening, empathetic listening. This is when you really not just understand what the speaker is saying, but you understand their emotions and the intent, and you're really listening into the unspoken as well as the spoken. And I think that is the most powerful, deepest form of listening that there is. One thing I do try to work really hard on in my own life and my business, but I need to work harder. I need to do better. One thing I try to work hard on is listening. Now, when it comes to my actual work as a copywriter, it's really only like I have to listen because it's really only when I listen that I'm able to understand the person that I'm writing for. It's the only way I can get to the heart and the root of what their clients are feeling and what they're like and the uniqueness of their business and their voice and their their brand and their feeling. And then, and only then, can I create the messaging that accurately reflects both them and the people that they're looking to speak to. So for me, I have to do a lot of it in my business. But let's talk about some of the benefits, like if you don't have to be a good listener per se. Like, why would you want to listen more? You probably don't need me to tell you that it's good for like every single relationship in your life. It's also good for your relationship with yourself and learning and growing and awareness overall. I was thinking about it, and like in the animal world, listening could be the difference between life and death, like life and a predator lunging through the woods attacking you. As human beings, we listen to connect, we listen to learn, we listen to help, to guide, to grow, to comfort, to relate. And as a business owner, one of the benefits is that it helps you to build connection and relationships. When you understand the emotions and the values and needs of other people, you build relationships. You can also help them. You can also show them that you care. You can also ensure that you're the right person for what they need. You're able to like really get to the heart and understand their pain points and their challenges and their struggles, their questions, their industry conversations, their feedback. And you can actually use these things to improve your own efforts, whether that be in your systems and processes, in your business overall, in the services that you're offering, in the content that you create, in the marketing that you're doing. Listening can actually help you reach them and speak to them better. You can also, I find, if you listen to what people are saying, you can just, in general, better speak to them on the same level, like you're speaking the same language. And then the one other benefit I kind of thought of listening, specifically in business, but I'd say life, it helps you to not assume as much. So it helps to eliminate some of that black and white thinking, or just assuming a person is one way, or assuming that they believe this, or it helps you assume less, okay? Makes you think less, oh, this is the right answer, this is the right decision. And I think it even like in decision making, it can also help you to make better decisions, because your decisions are actually based on insights and information and listening, rather than just like guessing and assuming. So I don't know. Listening is pretty foundational. We should have started with listening. We should have made it episode 1 of the Content with Character podcast. But I did not do that. Anyway, I'm not sure about you, but I have noticed that a lot of people, I should say many people, are not great or fantastic listeners. And I'm including myself in that, depending on the situation. I'm tossing myself into there too. So I was like, you know what? Let's get into this. Let's talk about the 5 levels of listening, how it can really help to boost our business and our marketing. But let me just say, it's not even about that. It's about being better in your relationships and throughout your entire life. So I think that the first step to any sort of change, any sort of growth, is awareness. And I thought we should just raise the awareness and talk about the benefits and the implications and really how these things show up in our marketing and in our businesses and in our lives. So level 1 is ignoring. And you can probably guess, just knowing what you know about me already, ignorers are not my favorite people. It's very hard, as one may imagine, to have a conversation of any kind with an ignorer. It may just be one of those things where it's like one-sided. And I'm not talking about you had a bad day and you need to vent about it. I'm talking a constant one-sidedness. It might be completely dismissing somebody else's advice or somebody else's opinion or their thoughts or their feedback or their emotions. In your business, it may look like never asking for customer feedback or skipping customer feedback, ignoring things in your market or your industry that you really should be paying attention to, and assuming that you always know the best or the right thing, not being willing to take in information or feedback from anybody else. The consequences can be pretty drastic. Missed opportunities, that's kind of like a no-brainer. Misaligned messaging, meaning that you may miss the mark entirely when you're reaching people, and then you're not able to help them at all with what they need. You may be speaking in a completely different proverbial language, right, that they don't even understand. And I unfortunately see so much marketing like this. Also, let's not forget those day-to-day deliverables where I see it too, with frustrated customers or collaborators and that's going to result in the impact being less referrals and business coming your way. Unfortunately, if you ignore, you are probably going to miss the mark on who you're talking to because you didn't take time to listen. And then you likely too will be ignored in the long run. One thing I know is that most people do not like feeling ignored, especially not when they're considering working with you. So here's an easy way to move up from level 1 listening, which is ignoring, to that next level. And that is really simply to just use surveys, get testimonials, open up conversations with clients and contractors and collaborators and ask them for feedback. Look at what your stats and your analytics are telling you. Go digging for some of those insights, right? That can inform you how to relate a little bit more and create more effectively in your business. There is nothing better than just like having a conversation with your ideal client to help you to understand their needs and their desires. So that's a kind of simple, easy way to move up from never even asking or never even listening to starting to open up some of those conversations. Level number 2, pretend listening. I told you I think ignorers are my least favorite, but I actually think pretend listening is my least favorite because when it happens to me, I'm like, oh, I am out. I disengage altogether. Because unlike being ignored, which is like, fine, whatever, we're just not even there. Now I also am going to feel disregarded, disrespected, less than, sometimes inferior to, or you're just like, there's no connection. And it's just really, really frustrating. It can drive you a little crazy. So pretend listening in like your everyday life. That might look like those surface level conversations. It might look like that sound when you sound like you're listening, like, yeah, but you're really not listening. And often I find that this sadly happens with other podcast hosts. I will be sharing a little bit about this in my last episode of the year next week, but I used to be guilty of this as a podcast host too. And it wasn't until I said, oh my gosh, I'm pretend listening in some of these conversations. It wasn't until I stopped half listening, aka pretend listening, that I really improved as a host and improved the overall conversation, not just for my guest and I, but also for my listeners. So let that be a lesson to any podcast host listening. But pretend listening in other aspects of our business and marketing might look like you really are only having surface level conversations like with your clients and your customers. And it never ends up giving you any sort of insight on the real heart of what people are thinking or feeling or needing. So what happens with that is you end up creating a lot of solutions that they don't actually need or want. It's kind of generic, okay? It's very generic content, very generic solutions. It might look like a lot of offerings. It might look like marketing and content that just it's not really landing with anybody. And that can end up being a really big problem. So the first way I would invite you to move up from this level is to just be aware that you might be pretend listening. And you have to ask yourself a little bit deeply, like, are you doing this because you genuinely care about the people on the other side? If so, well, why are you really doing what you're doing? Are you doing it the way because it's just easier to do it this way, or somebody else telling you to do this? Or does this feel like a fast track to success? Or is it a formula or a strategy? Once you're able to really figure that out and say, you know what, that's not actually why I want to be doing this. I want to be doing it because I care and want to connect with the person on the other side. You can move up that level pretty quickly. You can commit to deeper conversations with your clients and your customers. You can start asking open-ended questions and giving yourself space in discovery calls to really listen and really ask them what they need and what they're struggling with. Another way to do this is like hosting focus groups or meeting with other people in your industry and really talking about things and not just asking yes or no questions. And I would say not just letting a simple answer kind of stop there, like go a little bit deeper. So that's a way to move out of pretend listening. And also, if you're truly genuinely bored and like you don't want to be listening, maybe you need to find yourself in more reciprocal spaces where listening feels more fun, more engaging for you. Okay, once you move out of pretend listening, you may now advance to level 3, which is selective listening. Okay. I'm going to be honest with you. This is one that I am sometimes guilty of in my personal relationships. As I was getting ready for this episode, I actually had to do a little bit of reflection on this. And my husband and I were actually talking about it over date night one night. So when I slip into selective listening, it is because, in most cases, it is because I love helping people. I love supporting people. I love giving them solutions to fix their problems and ideas. And like, oh my gosh, I have an idea. I've been there. Let me reach into this toolkit of solutions and hand you a hammer. So I will listen in some cases. I will listen for my chance to pipe in and help. But if I dug a little bit deeper, sometimes this is not all about helping people. Sometimes this is because I like to feel smart. I like to feel accomplished. I want to be the person's go-to person or the confidant. So some of it, I will admit, is like driven by my ego, and that's gross. And now you've heard my deepest, darkest secrets. You're welcome. But it's really good to be aware of why you might selectively listen, because some of us might do it because we don't want to go into certain topics, right? So if we're just selectively listening, we can steer the topics in different directions. So it's really important to actually understand your why behind what you do. And I'm sure you have different motivations or reasons for doing that as well. But when we are listening with a motive or listening for what we want, we're not actually listening. We're just filtering it through our own little needs, our own little ego. We're just like, ooh, the ego likes that. And what we're doing is we're shutting down that chance for true connection, true understanding, deeper conversation, and deeper empathy, true listening. My husband shared with me, and I don't know the exact quote, but he shared with me something that J.K. Rowling said when it comes to opening your mouth and saying something. She said, if you go to open your mouth, something along the lines of, if you go to open your mouth and you get a huge adrenaline rush, or you're like getting like a hit of dopamine before you say the thing that you're about to say, take a minute, think about it, and ask yourself why you're saying it. It's not always wrong, okay? It's not always wrong. Like sometimes you just are really excited to say something, and that's okay. But think about why that's coming up, because sometimes it can be like, ooh, this is actually really nice, and my ego really enjoys what I'm about to say. What it looks like as a business owner and in our marketing, I think it shows up. I'm thinking of like specifically like a sales call or a discovery call, and that's only hearing in that setting. I mean, we can use it universally, but in that setting, like I could picture somebody only hearing what would confirm their own goals or their own biases or their own thoughts. Another way it might show up is like only focusing on the feedback that you want to focus on, which could be good or could be bad, depending on which way you swing on the feedback you focus on. But basically just closing down bigger perspectives and innovative ideas, because you're only paying attention to what you want to see, hear, and listen to. That can also make it so that you are now locked into something that someone said or expressed that meets your own agenda, meets your own needs, your own motives. So one way to start moving out of this is, first of all, just noticing, checking in when you are listening. Am I only listening to what I want to hear? Am I getting that rush of dopamine? Like, am I about to give my ego like a super duper treat right now by saying what I think? Am I challenging myself with feedback and ideas and thoughts that push me outside of my existing narrative? Am I listening? Am I really listening? And then we're moving up to level 4, attentive listening. Sounds like it should be the best one, but it's not. There's still better. But you still do get an A for attentive, okay? You get an A. We are almost level 5, which is listening transcendence, but we're not there yet. Attentive listening is great. It is a focus on other people and their needs and their values and their struggles. It's asking questions and opening up conversations and creating relevant content. Chances are high you're probably doing this really well in some areas of your life, and you might not be doing it so well in other areas of your life. The key is really, I think, to give people a little bit more space and time in conversations in general. Attentive listening is really giving people their airtime. Interestingly enough, I know quite a few slow talkers, and sometimes I'm just listening to them. I'm like, I would love to speed you up. But what I actually need to do is slow my listening down. Being an attentive listener says, Emily, let them talk at whatever speed they're sharing and not allowing myself to check out or disengage when that's happening. I talk fast, I listen fast, and I definitely need the reminder to be more attentive, which in my world means to go a little bit more slowly. Probably by now you're realizing that listening really just boils down to being mindful and slow and intentional and present. When those slow talkers finish, the other piece of the puzzle is not just jumping right in and sharing our thoughts. It's allowing it to sink in for a minute, right? And simmer in it a little bit. And then you can engage in the conversation from there. With our businesses and messaging and with our clients, it is no different. It's reviewing comments and feedback and customer conversations and using that information intentionally and slowly and mindfully to inform your messaging and your business and content. It's kind of like not reactive listening. I'll say that. So that's another way to kind of think of it. So here's an idea. You can take it or leave it. I listen back to my actual podcast interviews on some of the most interviews I guest on. The reason I do that is because I like to learn and grow from the way that I listened. So I'm able to listen. I can hear myself listening because I know myself. So I'm able to hear how me and the host were engaging, and I can listen to how I listened and use that to improve. You can do this in podcasts that you choose to listen to. You can do it in books that you're reading. You can do it in conversations that you're having. You can do it in conversations in your head. I don't know, but slow yourself down and listen to how you're listening. Are you really listening? Are you attentively listening, or are you passively or half listening, so that you can just kind of like, oh yeah, got that, and then move forward as speedily as possible, right? So I would say attentive listening is slower listening. Lastly, level 5, empathetic listening. If you want to know more about empathy and empathetic listening, you really should check out Brené Brown's podcast, Unlocking Us. I believe it's only on Spotify. I will include the link in the show notes. Brené Brown is the queen of empathetic listening. And by empathetic, I don't mean that you're taking on all their pain and problems as your own. Like, you're not going to come home with a stomach ache just because somebody else had one. And I don't want you turning that empathetic listening back on them. So that means, like, we're not here to like hammer down on the things that are painful for people and take those pain points and exploit them. Okay. Empathetic listening is really truly understanding the emotional and psychological state and motivations of another person. Basically listening to what they're not saying, and paying attention very closely and giving them what they need. In everyday life, this might just look like, you know what, when your best friend tells you about her horrible day, you ask her more questions instead of trying to solve a problem. You just show genuine care and concern. You kind of pay attention and listen for what she needs. Does she need a hug, a cry, reassurance, just a walk, right? So it's paying attention to some of those more quiet forms of speaking and language that we use. Empathetic listening is really hard. It is, especially for problem solvers, because we love to jump in and like fix things and give solutions and problems. And it's kind of not that. It's also not saying anything along the lines of like, oh, you think that, but you think you had a bad day? Wait till you hear about mine, right? Like, it's not one-upping somebody. And if you do have a relevant experience that you can share, I think it's nice at this, let's say it is a hard topic that you're kind of discussing. I think it's nice to ask if it's okay if you share a similar story so that you can gain more context or maybe share a relevant experience or something like that. But I do think you should kind of ask with that, just to make sure that you're not bypassing what they're saying. So these are obviously things you have to just keep on learning and keep on working on and keep on practicing. Like I said, Brené Brown's like the queen of empathetic listening. One of the tools I really like to use in my business and with my clients is just using language that reflects back what they shared. I'm not talking about like in a super cheesy way, like what I hear is you're feeling this, but really mirroring their words back to them. It's a really great way to help people to feel heard. Another idea is to be specific in the word choices that you use, words that they are actually using themselves rather than vague and elusive. So if you are working with tired moms who keep getting surprise cookie bake-offs and craft fairs thrown at them during an already chaotic holiday season, Use that specific situation and language in what you share with them. Go a level deeper and learn about what they really want. What are they really feeling? What do they really need to feel supported? And speak to that. Another super easy switch to make when you are practicing empathetic listening, both in your copy or your marketing or your everyday language, is to not use the word but as much. So I'll try to give you an example. If you are using it, for example, in your marketing, let's go back to that mom who is in the most flurry of a season that she could possibly be in. And then you go ahead with your marketing and you're like, but don't worry, or but at least you, or but at least my solution will, right? Like that tells me that whatever you're about to say next, you maybe really weren't listening to how serious this situation was for me or how much this feeling is bothering me. So instead, try to work on eliminating or not using so many buts and try the word and or the word or. So here's an example. Yes, it's a flurry of a season out there, and it's not fair that it's all on your plate. Yes, it's sheer chaos, and I feel for you. It's not the easiest thing in the world to run a business and home and bring in all those grocery bags all at once, and you deserve a rest. I love ands. They're a great word. They do allow for a lot more empathy because they're not negating every single thing that came before them. So they're a great word to help you really show somebody that you see them. And not only do you see them, you also know that there's more. There's more to even this that they're feeling and experiencing. So on that note, I will leave you to consider and be aware and begin practicing for yourself. And just to recap, the 5 levels that we covered in this episode were ignoring, that's level 1, pretend listening, that's level 2, selective listening, level 3, attentive listening, level 4, and the nirvana of listening, empathetic listening, level number 5. To really start applying better listening to your social media and your marketing and your business, really pay attention to engaging more deeply with people in conversations, whether they're online or offline. Speak more specifically to them. Offer things that they really want and need. And that means you have to find out what those things are so that you can offer tailored solutions, thoughtful, intentional answers. Start taking that customer feedback and those stories and those common frustrations and really be specific to those exact issues and needs. Share stories when you can so that other people can see themselves in them and relate to them, and then they feel less alone. They feel like they've been seen and that they've been heard, and they have something like really actionable or really hopeful that they can reach to. Actively ask questions and clarify things whenever it's applicable. Acknowledge feelings at hand, validate concerns and fears, and even sometimes if it relates, acknowledge the courage that it took them to share in the first place. Lastly, on the customer service front, when people are frustrated or they have questions or they want like a solution, instead of just like overlooking that they might have feelings that are frustration or discouragement or they're feeling let down, make sure you're acknowledging those feelings too, instead of just chiming in with like, here's how I'm going to fix it, right? It's important to resolve it so that they feel satisfied and are getting what they paid for, but it goes much further when you show them that you actually saw and heard what they were telling you about the problem. So from here, think about the different contexts listening would show up in your business and start being aware of those things so that you can kind of level up your listening. I promise it can be done. It is a skill. Listening is a skill. We can learn it. We can get better at it. And it's really key for long-term business growth and success. Even more importantly, it's also important for every single aspect of your relationship and your life. So, okay, on that note, I will chat with you next week. It's our final episode of 2024. I'm sharing my takeaways from my year of podcast guesting, which you should be able to learn from, even if you're not interested in being a podcast guest. But if you are, you will be off to the starting line of 2025 more than well equipped. thanks for listening to this week's episode of Content with Character. If you loved the episode, please make sure to subscribe to the podcast, rate, review, and share it with someone else you know it could help. For more content and visibility tips, visit my blog at emilyaborn.com, and be sure to connect with me on Instagram at emilyaborn. I'd love to hear how this inspired you to take action.